He thought it was just another bill, but it was a warning that could change the next 10 seconds of his life. The rooftop restaurant floated above the city like a quiet secret, 60 floors up, wrapped in glass and golden light, where the skyline stretched endlessly and conversation stayed low, polished, and expensive. Nia Bennett moved through that world like she didn't belong to it, her steps soft against the marble floor, her presence barely acknowledged by the people who never looked twice at someone carrying a tray. She had learned early that invisibility was safer, that in places like this, being unnoticed meant surviving the night without trouble. The table in the center of the terrace was different though. Everyone knew it without saying it. The staff avoided eye contact, the manager adjusted his tie 3 times in 10 seconds, and even the music felt quieter around that single table where Damien Calloway sat, his posture relaxed but his presence heavy enough to bend the atmosphere around him. He didn't need to raise his voice or make a scene, the way people watched him without staring said enough. Nia approached with the final course cleared, her hands steady from routine but her attention sharper than usual, because something about tonight felt off in a way she couldn't yet explain. The air carried a strange stillness, like the moment before a storm you couldn't see yet. As she reached the edge of the terrace, her eyes drifted past the polished railing, beyond the soft glow of string lights, toward the neighboring building across the street. That was when she noticed it, a faint, unnatural glint catching the corner of her vision, too precise, too still to be a reflection from the city. It flickered once, then held steady, like something waiting. Her breath slowed without her permission. She had seen that kind of light before, years ago, in a moment she had spent the rest of her life trying not to relive. Back then, no one else had noticed it either. Back then, she had looked away. This time, she didn't. The noise of the restaurant faded behind her as her mind locked onto that single detail, calculating angles without realizing it, tracing the line from that distant rooftop straight toward the center table. Straight toward him. Nia felt her fingers tighten slightly around the leather folder holding the bill. Her pulse quickened, not with panic, but with a cold clarity that settled deep in her chest. She turned back toward Damien Calloway, who was mid-conversation, his expression unreadable, his attention seemingly on the people in front of him. But something told her he wasn't the kind of man who ever stopped paying attention. Not really. She stepped forward, placing the bill gently on the table in front of him, her movements precise, controlled, just another waitress finishing her shift. Except this time, her hand lingered half a second longer than necessary. The pen moved quickly, almost imperceptibly, adding a small arrow along the edge of the paper, pointing outward, away from the table, toward the glass, toward the building across the street. Beneath it, in tight, deliberate letters, she wrote 5 words. Sniper on the roof. Run. When she pulled her hand away, nothing about her expression changed. She lowered her gaze like she always did, like she was trained to do, like she had done 1,000 times before. But this time, the silence between them stretched just a fraction longer. Damien picked up the bill without urgency, his eyes scanning it as if checking the total, his face calm, composed, untouched. Only his hand paused, barely noticeable, the slightest interruption in motion. He didn't look up. He didn't react. But something shifted in the stillness around him, subtle enough that no one else at the table seemed to notice. Nia stepped back, her heart steady despite the weight of what she had just done, knowing that in a place where she was meant to be invisible, she had just made the most dangerous decision of her life. 20 minutes earlier, the night had felt almost ordinary, at least by the standards of a place where a single bottle of wine could cost more than a week of someone's rent. Nia Bennett had started her shift the same way she always did, tying her apron in the staff hallway that smelled faintly of citrus cleaner and espresso grounds, adjusting the small silver pin on her uniform that no customer had ever once noticed. The manager, Curtis, had been pacing with a clipboard, his voice tight and impatient as he reassigned sections. When he reached her, he did not even look up. "You are covering the rooftop VIP tonight," he said, like he was handing off a problem he did not want to deal with. Nia paused for half a second, because she knew what that meant. The rooftop was where the highest spenders sat, the ones who expected perfection and remembered mistakes. It was also where staff were most visible, where one wrong move could cost you your job before the check even closed. Curtis finally glanced at her, his eyes scanning her like inventory. "Just stay quiet, do your job, and do not draw attention," he added, as if that had not already been her entire strategy for surviving in places like this. Nia nodded once, because arguing was not an option, and because she had learned that being underestimated could sometimes be an advantage. When she stepped out onto the rooftop for the first time that night, the city air hit her softly, cooler than the kitchen below, carrying the distant hum of traffic and the faint scent of rain that never quite arrived. The terrace stretched wide, lined with glass panels and warm lights that reflected off polished tables, creating the illusion of something almost peaceful. But beneath that calm surface, there was always a current of tension, the kind that came from money, power, and the unspoken rules that governed both. She moved between tables with practiced ease, refilling water glasses, clearing plates, keeping her eyes lowered just enough to avoid inviting conversation. Most guests barely acknowledged her existence, their attention fixed on their own worlds, their own deals, their own carefully curated lives. That was how it was supposed to be. Invisible meant safe. Invisible meant no one asked questions. But then the energy shifted. It was subtle at first, like a change in pressure you could feel more than see. Conversations dipped slightly, staff straightened their posture, and Curtis suddenly appeared at the entrance, smoothing his tie again. Nia followed his line of sight and saw the man walking onto the terrace. Flanked by two figures who kept just enough distance to appear like ordinary guests. Damien Calloway did not need an introduction. His presence carried it for him. He moved with a calm that did not ask for attention but commanded it anyway, his dark suit tailored perfectly, his expression composed, almost detached, like someone who had already calculated every possible outcome before sitting down. The woman beside him was striking, elegant in a way that felt deliberate, her smile measured, her eyes observant. They took the center table without hesitation, as if it had been waiting for them all along. Curtis hurried over, suddenly attentive in a way Nia had never seen from him before, offering menus with both hands, his voice softer, more respectful. Nia watched from a distance for a moment, not out of curiosity, but because she had learned to read rooms before stepping into them. There was something about the way the woman glanced around, quick and controlled, something about the way Damien's gaze lingered on reflections rather than people, that made the air feel just a little tighter. Nia picked up her tray and walked toward them when Curtis signaled her over, her step steady, her expression neutral, slipping once again into the role that kept her unnoticed, unaware that in less than half an hour, that same invisibility would be the only thing standing between calm and something no one else in that room was prepared to see. When Nia stepped into the orbit of the center table, everything slowed down just enough for her instincts to take over. She approached from Damien Calloway's right side, the tray balanced evenly in her hand, her posture aligned with the quiet precision that had kept her unnoticed for years. Up close, the details sharpened. The glassware reflected warm light like liquid gold, the linen was perfectly pressed, and the air carried a subtle mix of aged wine and expensive cologne. Damien did not look at her immediately, but she could feel his awareness, the way his attention moved without needing to follow his eyes. The woman across from him smiled as Nia poured the wine, her expression flawless, practiced, but her fingers tapped once against the table before going still again. It was a small movement, easy to miss, but Nia noticed patterns like that. She always had. She filled Damien's glass last, careful, steady, her hand not trembling, even though something inside her had already started tightening. When she straightened, her gaze naturally lowered, but not before catching the faint reflection in the glass wall behind them. The city stretched out in a grid of light, distant headlights tracing thin lines through the streets far below, but her focus locked onto something else. There it was again. That same pinpoint glint, positioned too perfectly on the rooftop across the street, not shifting like a passing reflection, not blinking like a window-catching light. It held steady, cold, deliberate. Nia felt a quiet pressure build behind her ribs. Her mind did not jump to conclusions, it calculated. Distance. Angle. Line of sight. The trajectory cut cleanly across the terrace, intersecting exactly where Damien sat. She shifted slightly, pretending to adjust the placement of a fork, just enough to change her perspective. The glint did not move. It did not need to. It was already aimed. Her throat tightened, not with panic, but with recognition. Years ago, she had stood on a sidewalk 12 feet away from someone she loved, watching a similar reflection without understanding what it meant until it was too late. She had replayed that moment in her mind more times than she could count, memorizing every detail she had missed, every signal she had ignored. Since then, her eyes had learned to search for things other people overlooked. Reflections. Angles. Stillness where there should have been motion. She never turned that part of herself off, not even in a place like this where she was supposed to simply serve and disappear. Nia's attention flickered back to the table. The woman leaned slightly forward, speaking softly, her tone smooth, but her eyes did not stay on Damien. They moved, briefly, toward the edge of the terrace, then back again. Not nervous. Not distracted. A check. A confirmation. Nia felt the pieces begin to settle into place, not fully formed, but enough to understand the shape of what was happening. This was not coincidence. This was timing. Her pulse remained steady, but her thoughts sharpened, narrowing down to one question. What could she do without being seen doing it? She could not speak. A raised voice would draw every eye in the room, and whatever waited across that rooftop would not hesitate. She could not run. That would change nothing. She could not ignore it. That, she had already learned, was the worst choice of all. The weight of that decision pressed into her chest, but it did not paralyze her. It focused her. Nia took a slow breath, her hands returning to the tray as if nothing had changed, as if she was just another waitress finishing another service. But behind that calm exterior, her mind had already moved forward, already searching for the one action that would matter, the one moment that could shift everything by just a fraction of a second. And somewhere across the street, that single point of light remained fixed, patient, waiting for a moment that no one else in the restaurant even knew was coming. The decision did not arrive all at once, it formed in layers, each second pressing tighter against the next until there was no room left for hesitation. Nia remained at the edge of the table, her posture composed, her face neutral, but inside her mind, every possibility unfolded and collapsed in rapid succession. If she spoke, even softly, it would break the fragile balance of the room. Conversations would stop, heads would turn, and the stillness across the street would not wait to understand why. If she walked away and told the manager, Curtis would dismiss her without even looking up, or worse, he would call attention to her in front of everyone. And if she did nothing, if she returned to the kitchen and pretended she had not seen that cold glint holding steady in the distance, she already knew how that story ended. She had lived it once before, and the memory did not fade with time, it sharpened. A sidewalk. A reflection. A moment where speaking too late meant living with silence forever. Nia felt her fingers tighten slightly against the edge of the tray, grounding herself in something physical, something real. Around her. The restaurant continued as if nothing had changed. A couple laughed softly at a nearby table, a server passed behind her carrying a tray of desserts, the music drifted in smooth and steady. The world did not pause for danger when it was quiet. It never did. She allowed herself one more glance, brief and controlled, toward the glass. The angle was still perfect. The distance, roughly 150 feet across the narrow street gap, placed the line directly through the center table. Whoever was out there had chosen the position carefully. That realization settled something inside her. This was not random. This was deliberate. Her attention returned to Damien. He sat exactly as before, one hand resting near his glass, his expression unreadable, his posture relaxed in a way that felt almost intentional. But now that she was looking for it, she noticed the difference. His eyes did not linger on the people at the table. They moved, briefly, to reflections, to edges, to the same surfaces she had been watching. He was not unaware. He was assessing. That changed everything. Nia understood then that whatever she did, it had to reach him without reaching anyone else. Not the woman across from him, not the staff hovering at a distance, not the unseen presence across the street. It had to be small. Invisible. Just enough. Her breath slowed as the idea formed, simple in its shape, dangerous in its execution. The bill. It was the only object she could place directly in front of him without suspicion, the only moment where her hands would be close enough, long enough, to leave something behind that only he would see. But even that carried risk. If he misunderstood, if he dismissed it, if anyone else noticed, she would not get a second chance. Nia shifted her weight slightly, the movement natural, practiced, as if preparing to step away. Her heart beat once, steady, not racing, just present. Fear was there, but it did not control her. It guided her, the same way it had ever since she learned that danger did not announce itself with noise. It waited in silence, in reflections, in details most people trained themselves to ignore. She lowered her gaze, already moving. Through the motions in her mind, already deciding that doing nothing was no longer an option she could live with. And in that quiet space between one breath and the next, Nia chose to act, knowing that whatever came after would not be something she could take back. The moment arrived quietly, without announcement, carried on the same calm rhythm of service that no one questioned. Nia stepped back from the table just long enough to retrieve the bill from the service station, her movements fluid, routine, exactly what was expected of her. The leather folder felt heavier than it should have as she opened it, the blank receipt waiting inside like a narrow window of time she could not afford to waste. Her hand reached for the pen clipped to her apron, and for a fraction of a second, her fingers hesitated above the paper, not from doubt, but from precision. There was only one way this would work. It had to be fast. It had to be clear. It had to be invisible to everyone except him. She bent slightly over the counter, her body angled just enough to shield the page from passing eyes, and then she moved. The pen slid across the paper in a single controlled motion, drawing a small arrow along the edge of the receipt, not too bold, not too faint, just enough to guide attention without drawing it. Beneath it, she wrote the words with tight, deliberate strokes, each letter placed with care, her breathing steady, her mind locked onto the line she had already traced a dozen times in her head. Sniper on the roof. Run. She did not reread it. There was no time for second guesses, no space for correction. The ink settled into the paper as she closed the folder, her expression unchanged, her posture returning to neutral as if nothing had happened. Around her, the restaurant continued its quiet performance. A server laughed softly near the bar, glassware chimed faintly in the distance, and the city lights flickered beyond the glass like a distant, indifferent audience. Nia picked up the folder and walked back toward the table, each step measured, each movement aligned with the role she had perfected. Invisible. Unremarkable. Safe. When she reached Damien, she placed the bill in front of him with the same calm efficiency she had used 100 times before, her hand steady, her eyes lowered, her voice absent. She did not linger, but she did not rush either. Timing mattered now more than anything else. For a single second, her fingertips remained on the edge of the folder, just long enough to ensure it was positioned directly in front of him, angled slightly toward his line of sight. Then she let go. Nia stepped back, her heart no louder than before, her breathing even, her gaze fixed somewhere just beyond the table as if she had already moved on to the next task. But every part of her awareness stayed anchored to that moment, to that small rectangle of paper that now held everything she could not say out loud. Damien reached for the bill without urgency, his movements controlled, unhurried, exactly as they had been all night. He opened the folder with a casual ease that revealed nothing, his eyes dropping to the receipt as if checking a number, a total, a detail that meant nothing to anyone else. The silence stretched, thin and fragile, and then it shifted. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but Nia saw it. His gaze paused, not long, not enough for anyone else to notice, but long enough. His fingers stilled for half a heartbeat, the smallest interruption in motion, before continuing as if nothing had changed. He did not look up. He did not react. He did not even blink differently. But something in the air around him tightened, sharpened, like a line pulled taut. Nia felt it in the space between them, an unspoken acknowledgement that did not need words. He had seen it. He had understood. She turned away then, just another waitress moving to the next table, her steps quiet, her presence already fading back into the background where she belonged. But behind her, at the center table, the stillness had changed, and somewhere across the street, that distant point of light remained fixed, waiting for a moment that was no longer entirely its own. Damien closed the bill without changing his expression, his fingers resting lightly on the leather cover as if nothing of consequence had passed through his hands, but inside that stillness, a decision had already been made. He did not look toward the glass, did not shift his gaze toward the distant rooftop, because a man like him did not survive by reacting where others could see. Instead, he leaned back slightly in his chair, his posture loosening just enough to appear casual, as if the evening had reached its natural end. The woman across from him continued speaking, her voice smooth, her smile controlled, but there was a faint tightening at the corner of her eyes now, a subtle awareness that something had changed, even if she could not yet define it. Damien lifted his glass, pausing for a brief moment as if considering the taste, his movements measured, deliberate, every second stretched just enough to shift the timing of everything around him. Then he set the glass down and rose from his seat, not abruptly, not urgently, but with the quiet authority of someone who expected the room to adjust around him. Chairs scraped softly, conversations faltered, and his companions looked up in mild surprise, but no one questioned it. He stepped to the side, repositioning himself by no more than a foot, his body angled slightly away from where he had been sitting just seconds before. It was a small movement, almost meaningless to anyone watching, but it changed the line that had been drawn across the terrace from that distant rooftop. Nia saw it from across the floor as she cleared another table, her hands steady even as her attention locked onto that single shift. Time seemed to compress into a narrow space where every detail mattered. The air felt different, tighter, as if the city itself was holding its breath. Then it happened. A sharp crack split the quiet hum of the rooftop, not loud enough to be immediately understood, but enough to fracture the calm. Glass trembled. A chair jolted slightly out of place where Damien had been sitting moments earlier. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Confusion flickered across faces, conversation stalled mid-sentence, and the illusion of safety wavered just enough to reveal something underneath it. Then the reaction came all at once. Voices rose, chairs shifted, the soft order of the restaurant unraveling into scattered movement as people tried to understand what they had just heard. Damien did not hesitate. His hand moved with precise control, reaching back to steady the woman beside him, guiding her away from the table without force, without panic, but with unmistakable intent. His gaze lifted briefly, not toward the rooftop, but toward the reflections along the glass, tracing the same line that Nia had seen minutes before. His eyes narrowed just slightly, not in fear, but in calculation. He turned, his focus shifting across the room until it found her. Nia stood near the edge of the terrace, one hand resting against the back of a chair, her posture composed despite the rising noise around her. For a fraction of a second, their eyes met. There was no gratitude in his expression, no overt acknowledgement, just a clear, unspoken understanding. He knew. Not just what she had written, but why she had written it. That was enough. Without breaking that composure, Damien made a small, almost imperceptible gesture with his hand, and two men who had blended seamlessly into the background moments before moved into position, their attention shifting outward, scanning, adjusting. The woman beside him spoke quickly now, her calm beginning to crack, but Damien did not respond. His focus remained fixed, not on the noise, not on the confusion, but on control. And across the street, that distant point of light that had held so steady just minutes ago flickered once, then disappeared, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than before, as if something had been interrupted at the last possible second. The noise did not settle all at once, it fractured into layers, confusion spreading through the rooftop in uneven waves as guests tried to understand what had just interrupted the illusion of control they had paid to experience. Glassware trembled slightly on tables, chairs shifted out of alignment, and voices rose in uncertain tones, each one searching for an explanation that no one could quite provide. Nia did not move at first. She remained exactly where she was, her hand still resting lightly against the chair, her breathing steady, her expression unchanged. But inside, she felt the shift, the invisible line that had just been crossed. The moment she had acted, she had stepped out of the safety she had built for herself. And there was no stepping back from that. A hand closed gently but firmly around her arm. The touch was controlled, not rough, but it carried authority that did not invite resistance. Nia turned her head slowly and found herself facing one of the men who had been invisible just minutes before, his presence now unmistakable. His gaze was sharp, focused, assessing every detail of her face as if trying to read something she had not said out loud. "You need to come with us," he said quietly, his voice low enough not to draw attention, but firm enough that it was not a request. Around them, the restaurant continued to ripple with movement, but no one intervened, no one questioned. Nia nodded once, because she understood that refusal was not an option, and because part of her had expected this. She allowed herself to be guided away from the terrace, her steps calm, measured, even as the distance between her and the open air closed behind her. The transition from the warm glow of the rooftop to the cooler, dimmer hallway felt immediate, like stepping into a different world entirely. The sounds of the restaurant faded, replaced by the quiet hum of air conditioning and distant footsteps echoing through the service corridors. They led her down a narrow set of stairs, past doors marked private, until the air grew still and heavy with silence. The room they brought her into was small, windowless, lit by a single overhead light that cast sharp shadows against plain walls. Nia stood in the center of it, her posture straight, her hands at her sides, resisting the instinct to fold inward. The door closed behind her with a soft but final sound. Another man entered a moment later, his presence quieter but no less intense, and positioned himself near the wall, watching. The first man stepped forward, his attention fixed entirely on her now. His expression did not show anger, but it did not show trust either. It was the look of someone trained to find threats where others saw none. "How did you know?" he asked, each word measured, deliberate. Nia met his gaze, not defiant, not submissive, just steady. For a moment, she considered how much to say, how much to reveal. The truth was simple, but it did not sound simple when spoken out loud. "I saw the reflection," she answered, her voice calm, even. "On the building across the street." He did not respond immediately. His eyes narrowed slightly, not in disbelief, but in calculation. "That is not something most people notice," he said after a pause. Nia held her ground. "Most people are not looking for it," she replied. The room fell quiet again, the weight of that statement settling into the space between them. Somewhere beyond the walls, the city continued, unaware, unchanged. Inside, the silence stretched, waiting. And for the first time since she had picked up that pen, Nia understood that saving a life was only the beginning of what would follow. The silence in the room did not break when the door opened again, it deepened. The man who stepped inside did not need to announce himself. Damien Calloway carried the same controlled stillness from the rooftop into the confined space, his presence filling the room without raising his voice or quickening his pace. The two men already inside shifted almost imperceptibly, not stepping aside, but adjusting, acknowledging a hierarchy that did not need to be spoken. Damien's gaze moved to Nia, not hurried, not searching, but precise, as if he had already decided what he was looking for before he entered. For a moment, no one spoke. The air felt heavier under the single overhead light, shadows sharper against the walls. Nia stood where she had been left, her posture unchanged, her hands still at her sides, but now she felt the weight of his attention in a way that was different from the rooftop. Out there, he had observed her. In here, he was measuring her. He stepped closer, stopping just far enough to keep distance, just close enough that she could see the faint reflection of the light in his eyes. "You wrote it," he said, his voice low, even, not a question. Nia met his gaze. Yes. The word was simple, but it did not waver. Damien held her there for a second longer, then his eyes shifted slightly, as if replaying the sequence of events in his mind, aligning her action with what had just unfolded. "Why?" he asked, not with suspicion, but with something quieter, something closer to understanding. Nia felt that question settle into her chest, heavier than the others had been. It was not about what she saw. It was about what made her act. She did not rush the answer. "Because I have seen what happens when no one says anything," she said finally, her voice steady, her tone unchanged. The room went still again, but this time the silence felt different, less like pressure and more like recognition. Damien's expression did not soften, but something in his gaze shifted, a fraction, enough to suggest that he understood more than she had said. One of the men by the wall stepped forward slightly, his attention moving between them. "We checked the building across the street," he said, directing his words to Damien. "Whoever was there is gone." Damien did not look away from Nia. "Of course they are," he replied quietly, as if that outcome had already been expected. His focus returned fully to her, sharper now, more deliberate. "You noticed something trained people miss," he said, his tone measured, not praise, not disbelief, just fact. Nia did not respond immediately. She did not see it as something unusual. She saw it as something necessary. "I look where people do not," she answered. "It is easier when no one is looking at you." That earned the smallest pause, the faintest shift in the room's energy, as if the truth in that statement carried more weight than the words themselves. Damien studied her for another moment, then straightened slightly, his posture resetting, his decision forming without being spoken. "She is not involved," he said, his voice calm but final, directed to the others. "Leave us." The men hesitated only a fraction of a second before stepping out, the door closing behind them with the same quiet finality as before. The room felt different with just the two of them, the tension no longer spread across multiple eyes, but focused, contained. Damien moved a step closer, his gaze still fixed on her, but now there was something else beneath it, not warmth, not yet, but a recognition that had not been there before. "You changed the outcome of tonight," he said, not as a compliment, but as a statement of consequence. Nia did not look away. "I just saw it early," she replied. The difference between those two things lingered in the space between them, quiet, undeniable. And for the first time since the rooftop, Damien did not immediately respond, as if he understood that what she had done was not about him at all, but about something far deeper that could not be measured in simple terms of debt or gratitude. 3 days later, the rooftop restaurant reopened as if nothing had ever happened, the glass polished, the tables aligned, the music flowing once again through the warm evening air as guests returned to their carefully constructed sense of normal. Nia Bennett stood in the same hallway where her shift had begun days before, tying her apron with the same quiet precision, her expression unchanged, but something within her had settled into a different kind of stillness. No one had spoken to her about that night. No one had asked questions. The manager, Curtis, had acted as though it had never occurred, his voice just as sharp, his expectations just as rigid. In places like this, silence was not unusual. It was policy. When she stepped back onto the rooftop, the city stretched out beneath her once again, the same skyline, the same reflections, but she noticed the details differently now. Not with fear, but with awareness. The center table remained the same, positioned beneath the soft lights, waiting for whoever would claim it next. For most people, it was just another table. For her, it marked a moment that had already changed something permanent. The dinner service moved steadily, guests arriving, orders placed, conversations drifting across the terrace. Nia moved through